Welcome to today's Explainer. We're basically embarking on an intellectual detective story today, one that spans 2.5 millennia. We're going to follow the breadcrumbs all the way from ancient philosophers to cutting-edge modern neuroscience, all to solve one of humanity's greatest puzzles about identity. We'll be looking at some fascinating source material that bridges the gap between ancient metaphysics and modern mathematics. So grab a seat and get ready, because this is absolutely going to fundamentally shift how you view your own mind.
Okay, let's dive into this. It all starts with this stark, foundational question that has literally hooked the greatest minds in history. What is it that remains the same while everything changes? I mean, it sounds like a simple riddle, right? But when you really stop and think about it, it's a massive paradox that completely defies common sense. Our universe is in a state of constant, relentless flux. Absolutely nothing stands still. And yet somehow, amidst all that chaos, identity persists.
To really grasp why this matters so much to our understanding of our own existence, let's look at the classic example of a seed growing into a tree. On one hand, we know everything changes. The biological cells inside a seed multiply, they die off, they're completely replaced. The physical matter is 100% different. But on the other hand, the identity persists. We recognize it as the exact same tree. And honestly, the same goes for you and me. You aren't made of the same physical cells you were as a toddler, right? Yet you are undeniably the same person. So how on earth does this continuous identity emerge from perpetual change?
Well, our source material traces this mystery through 4 distinct eras, and each leap really refines our understanding. We're going to start way back with Pythagoras in the 6th century BCE, move to the heavy-hitting debates of Plato and Aristotle, jump ahead to Mulla Sadra in the 17th century, and finally arrive right here in the 21st century with modern continuity theory. Let's trace these stepping stones. It all kicks off with the Pythagorean insight. You've probably heard their famous, kind of crazy-sounding claim that everything is number. Now, they weren't saying that a rock is literally made out of the integer 3, obviously. Instead, they made this massive conceptual leap. By studying things like musical harmony, plucking strings, they realized that invisible mathematical relations actually generate the observable order in the world. Like, an octave is just a 2-to-1 ratio. This was humanity's very first realization that underlying organization is actually way more fundamental than the physical material itself.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happened next. That mathematical realization perfectly set the stage for Plato. He took this idea of mathematical order and proposed transcendent forms. He basically thought the changing physical world was just a cheap, imperfect copy of perfect eternal templates that existed in some separate, mystical realm. But his student Aristotle totally rejected that separation. Aristotle introduced immanent organization. He argued, no, matter and form always exist together, right here in reality. He yanked organization out of the heavens and placed it directly inside existing concrete things.
Which brings us to a wildly revolutionary thinker in the 17th century, Mulla Sadra. He introduced the profound idea of substantial motion. See, before him, philosophers thought of objects as having a fixed, static essence, and only their surface properties changed. Sadra essentially erased the line between object and process. He argued that existence itself is in continuous motion. The core substance evolves. So a thing isn't a permanent object that just happens to move. It is a continuously developing trajectory of existence. He perfectly anticipated modern dynamical systems thinking hundreds of years early.
So the crucial point is, how does modern science handle this evolving trajectory today? Enter continuity theory, and specifically the concept of regulatory continua. This is the modern scientific successor to all those ancient ideas. Instead of a static essence, continuity theory introduces these dynamic, overlapping systems, these continua. They are evolving organizational regulators that preserve a unit's identity, all while allowing it to undergo massive physical transformation. So identity isn't a fixed thing anymore. It's an organized process of continuous regulation.
Now, to really understand these continua, we need modern mathematics, and not just for counting things, but as the ultimate language of organization itself. Let's do a rapid-fire translation. Geometry describes the structural form. Topology describes how identity is preserved even when things get totally warped and deformed. Calculus gives us the exact rates of continuous transformation. And control theory describes how these systems regulate themselves to survive. It's like the math is literally describing the philosophical functions of reality.
But wait, is mathematics actually real? The source text clarifies this beautifully. Mathematics is not materially objective.
I mean, you can't exactly stub your toe on an equation, right? Not the same way you'd stub it on a rock or a molecule. However, mathematics and these regulatory continua are undeniably structurally objective. Every mathematician on Earth arrives at the same result from the same axioms. So even though they lack physical mass, they are incredibly objective structures that dictate exactly how material processes behave.
This gives us such a fascinating new lens to view ancient concepts, especially something like the soul. The source provides this incredible quote, stating, "The ancient soul is reinterpreted as a coordinated organizational unity rather than a single indivisible substance." Think about it. For thousands of years, the soul was basically humanity's earliest placeholder to explain life, memory, and identity. Continuity theory just completely deconstructs this. Instead of one ghostly entity floating around in there, what the ancients called the soul is actually multiple cooperating biological, emotional, and cognitive continua, all working together to create you.
And applying this entire 2,500-year evolution of thought directly to the tangible reality of the human brain gives us the Brain Kinematics Model, or BKM. It takes all of this dense theoretical groundwork and applies it right to neuroscience. BKM views the human mind not as a static anatomical computer, but as a continuously evolving organization of motion. Thinking itself, the act of cognition, is an organized mathematical transformation.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how BKM breaks this down. It argues that neural activity isn't just random electrical sparking. It has three highly organized components. First up, there's a neural strain field, which is essentially the localized potential of brain activity. Second, you have strain flow, which is the directed transport of that activity across the cortex. And third, the oscillatory phase, which is where different parts of the brain synchronize their rhythms. So your thoughts are quite literally organized, flowing strain packages moving physically through the structure of your brain. Let's move to that and see how this builds into an absolutely incredible feedback cycle, the recursive reorganization loop. Notice step 1. Your physical neural structure actually constrains how the strain flows. Basically, it dictates how you think. But then look at step 2. That very flow of thought actually modifies and changes your physical neural structure in real time, which directly leads to step 3. This newly modified structure generates entirely new patterns of motion. Form generates motion, and then that motion continuously regenerates the form. Your mind and your memories are literally rebuilding themselves on the fly. And this brings our whole narrative full circle, right back to that seed growing into a mighty tree. The source summarizes this entire journey with one profound realization. Mind is not a fixed structure, but a continuously evolving organization of neural regulatory continua. Our identity, our consciousness, our very sense of self. It isn't a static, unchanging object just sitting inside our skulls. It is the organized continuity of mathematically describable transformation. We are, quite literally, the beautiful mathematical pattern of our own continuous change. Which leaves us with this final, awe-inspiring question to chew on. Is your own mind simply a temporarily stabilized trajectory within a multi-scale continuum? You aren't a fixed thing. You are a brilliant, self-regulating trajectory of motion that has managed to stabilize just long enough to ask questions about its own existence. No way to look at yourself the same after that, right? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning everything.